Namaste Friends, welcome back to the Web Technology video learning series. In this series so far, we have learned a bit about HTML. We started learning about various aspects of CSS. Today, we will learn a new topic in CSS, that is how to embed CSS in HTML. So what does embedding mean? Embedding really means connecting CSS to the HTML so that we can make use of the styles properly. Before that, let's have a quick recap. CSS is a style sheet language and we use it to basically describe the presentation of a document whose content is written in a markup language which is HTML. CSS uses a different syntax than HTML. It uses declarative syntax for defining the styles. The files that are containing the style definitions, they are called style sheets. CSS defined styles can be shared across web pages, meaning you can use the same styles in a one style sheet across different web pages, and likewise one web page can use styles from different style sheets as well. An example of how powerful CSS is has been shown in the previous classes as well. Please visit the website CSS Zen Garden, and so that you'll be able to appreciate the power of CSS. Back to our class. What is embedding CSS? The term embedding CSS is really referring to how we are linking the CSS styles that are in a style sheet or somewhere to a HTML document. The end purpose is that we define styles so as to be able to use them and present the HTML document better, right? So there are four ways of doing it: inline CSS, embedded or internal CSS, external CSS, and lastly imported CSS. These are four different ways of linking CSS defined style to HTML so that it can be used. Let's learn about each of them. Inline CSS is where the style is placed as a text in line with the actual HTML content, but using the style attribute of the elements in HTML. Each HTML element or a tag has a style attribute, and the value for this attribute can be the CSS text that we have defined, CSS style that we have defined. You can see the example where in line number 4, a style for h1 tag has been defined. The style attribute for h1 tag has been defined as a blue colored text and center aligned text. Likewise, in line number 7, attribute style has been defined with a color value of red with for the paragraph tag. This is called inline CSS because we are defining the style in line with the actual HTML tag. Now, as you can see, if you have multiple paragraphs or multiple headings, the style attribute definition has to be repeated for every one of those tags or those elements. This is duplication or triplication or whatever. So if we have a website that spans across maybe hundreds of web pages, this essentially results in lot of unwanted text because we are not really reusing, we are just duplicating. The next one is called an internal or embedded CSS. The example of this is been given on the right hand side on the screen. The internal or the embedded CSS uses the style tag of HTML inside the head section and places all the CSS there. You can see the example where line number 3 is defining the style tag up to line number 11, and in between these two lines proper CSS has been put, and the body of the HTML You can see this is the simple selector, simple element selector. So it says the body of any HTML file that uses this style should have a background of light gray color, and any h1 element should have a maroon color and text. You should actually ignore this small boxes that actually depict the color. These are essentially given out by the IDE. If in practice when you are writing, you don't write those boxes, you just write the text. In any case, so the example is that the style tag, the definition of internal CSS or an embedded CSS is that we embed the CSS style in between the beginning and the end tags of the style tag inside the head section in the HTML. All the styles that we want will put here. You can see in the body section of the HTML, the content is pretty clean. We don't refer to any style. The styles are automatically derived and it looks pretty clean. We don't at least duplicate within the same web page. Individual elements can refer to other styles. For example, if we are using an ID selector or a class selector, you can make use of the styles from the styles that are defined above. But then, if we have the example of having a website with hundreds of pages, right? Let's say 100 pages. Each of these pages must have the same style definition in the head section, which means we are essentially repeating the CSS not for every HTML tag but for every HTML page. It is still repeating. The next one is called external CSS. In an external CSS, what we do is we copy paste all our CSS into a file, name it. It will be a text file, of course. Name it and then refer to that file from within the HTML file under the head tag within as an attribute of a link tag. Pay attention to the example on the right hand side. On the bottom right hand side of the screen, we have the CSS in a file called learn.css, and this file is linked to the HTML in line number 3 in the link tag. It says href is equal to learning.css. It's the same file. I think there is a typo over there. It's the same file. The type of the file link is referred to as text or CSS, and the rel attribute is defined as a style sheet. So with this, the browser knows when the HTML is obtained from the server, the browser parses through the HTML file, looks at this link tag, and then understands that it has to load a new file, goes back to the browser and asks for this new CSS, and once that file is available, it appropriately styles the HTML based on the style sheet. The difference is really only in how we are maintaining the styles. In the previous mechanism, we were copy pasting the styles within the HTML head section. Now we are actually referring to a different website, different file. Individual elements can continue to refer to the styles. There is no duplication here because all we are doing is referring to the HTML, referring to the CSS file from different HTML files. So this way, if ever we want to make a change, let's say somebody says make a change, the background color of the HTML file should not be in light gray but should be, let's say, in white. Then we just change in one place in the CSS file. Multiple CSS files can also be linked in the same HTML file. There is no restriction that you can use only one CSS file. Now, what happens when we have multiple CSS files? We will learn in a couple of slides later. The last mechanism is called imported CSS. In imported CSS is like um, the external CSS, in the sense that we refer to a um, different CSS file which is not, and the CSS is not defined as part of the HTML. The difference is that we don't use the link tag unlike the external CSS. We use the style tag and we use the @import rule of HTML. With the @import rule, we refer to an external CSS. In the example, you can see we are referring to a file called learn CSS. Everything else is the same. Individual elements can continue to refer. All HTML files can use the same file. Multiple CSS files can be used within the same HTML file. But one major difference between the external CSS and the imported CSS is this: import can be made conditional. What does it mean to be conditional? Let's say we have our web pages that are loaded on different devices. Some, we can say that I want the style to be appearing only if um, the 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 client on which the browser on the browser is running on a screen which is at least 100 pixels or 200 pixels. Alternately, you use a different style, right? So you can make a condition. You look at the example. In line number 4, we are conditioning the import with a min width of 700 pixels, which means that this CSS is loaded only if the viewport or the screen size of the browser is at least 700 pixels. Maybe there are older cell phones or even older screens which do not have this this width, in which case this particular CSS will not be loaded and some other alternate form of CSS will be loaded. So this is one way we can make them conditional, and there can be more than one condition with a AND operator or so. So this is one major difference between an import and a external CSS mechanism. Now we said CSS allows multiple embedded techniques. Now the key here is all of them can be used simultaneously, and multiple style sheets can also be used within the same HTML document. Then the immediate question is, what if I have what is the result style? The answer is the result style is essentially a sum of all the styles from everything that is linked. Then the obvious question is, what if I have the same style defined differently in each of the linked CSS files or inline CSS or whatever technique that we are using? This is called conflict of styles. Then CSS defines a mechanism in which the conflicts can be resolved. Any inline CSS, which is basically defined using the style attribute of HTML element, is treated with the highest priority. If there is a style element that is defined this way, that is applied as is, no change. If there is no inline CSS, the next priority will be internal, external, and imported. Okay, these are where internal is where, if you remember, the CSS is put as is in a head section. External and imported are referring to an external CSS file. Now within these, if all of these are mentioned or more than one of them is available, whichever is mentioned later in the HTML document will have a precedence. If none of them are available for a particular styling, then browser default will take preference. Okay, this is the lowest priority, but in case none of the above mechanisms are available for styling a given element, browser will choose its own defaults and then apply the styling. I hope you have enjoyed the lesson today. we have learnt about different CSS embedding techniques, how to link the CSS style that we have defined to a HTML file so that the styles can be used. So, if you remember correctly, there were 3 steps in using CSS. 1. Defining the style. 2. Linking the style to a HTML element. And 3. Using the style. I hope we have covered all the 3 so far. And the CSS can only be learned by practice, more practice, and even more practice. As I said, CSS is more to get the right presentation, the look that we want is an art form. I hope you have learnt enough to do experimentation and arrive at the desired result. Thank you.